study. If you will, take your Bibles and turn to Genesis chapter 41. Good to see our class doubles in size when y'all don't have to go to the nursing home, which I know y'all like to go, but we're glad you're here too. So we're glad you're here. Just to recap the last couple of weeks, we've went through the famous story of the pit and prison, and today we're going to find ourselves in the palace, and we're talking about Joseph and his life, and just to kind of bring everybody up to speed here, we started a few weeks ago with Joseph being loved more than all the other brothers, and we've seen that before in family history. His dad made him a coat of many colors. His brothers hated him for it. They threw him in a pit. Well, they was wanting to kill him. Then they decided they'd be more economical just to throw him in a pit, and they did that. And then they decided that it was really economical just to sell him to the hand of the Ishmaelites. And of course, Reuben came back and was distraught because he was accountable for his brother since he was the oldest. And so they made up this story, a ruse about a wild beast had devoured him, and they covered the coat in goat's blood and sent it back to their father. And of course, last week we looked at the Ishmaelites sold him to, or Potiphar bought him from the Ishmaelites. He was down in Potiphar's house. He was the overseer, kind of the number 2 man. He was over everything except for he could have everything but, of course, Potiphar's wife, and she cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she tried to be with him every day, and finally he left his coat and got him out, and she told a story on him, and he found himself in prison. And while he was in prison, he met 2 characters, the butler and the baker, and he interpreted a dream for them, and of course it come to pass, and the baker was hanged, and the butler was restored his duties. But we finished last week with verse 23 of chapter 40, said, "Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forget him." So he forgot all about Joseph down there. So now we pick up the story here this morning in chapter 41. And this series here, the last few weeks, you could really close and open the curtains a lot. I always like to do that. It's kind of like in a play, but this is not a fictional story. It's a real story, but we kind of open up the scene now in Pharaoh's chambers. And I mean, this is the highest man in the land. This is Pharaoh himself. And, I think that was one thing I drew from this. I mean, this is a familiar story, but I think sometimes I like to try to put myself there. I mean, we've seen a lot about the Queen on TV this week with her passing and the new king. And, I mean, we're talking about somebody down here in prison that's probably worse than the regional jail is getting ready to go to the king's, which in this case, Pharaoh's house. So I want you, really think about that. I mean, this is, I think sometimes we just read this, but I mean, this is not a logical thing in our mind. This is not like the president's going to go over there and go to her funeral in a few days. This is somebody that's in a deep, dark dungeon in a prison. So let's read that this morning in chapter 41, verse 1. "And it came to pass at the end of the 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river." So what we see right off the bat here is there's 2 years have passed since Joseph interpreted these dreams, and the butler and the baker were restored. Of course, the baker was hanged, and then the butler was restored back to his duties. So 2 years have passed, not 2 days, but 2 full years. "And behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine and fat-fleshed, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, and ill-favored and lean flesh, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and the lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke." So he's had a dream, and there was his dream, and he's woke up. And he slept and dreamed the second time, and behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. And behold, 7 thin ears, and blasted with the east wind sprung up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears, and Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. So twice here he's dreamed a very similar dream. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled. So, if you've ever dreamed before, sometimes you can remember bits and pieces of it. Sometimes you can remember a dream very vividly. So apparently this dream was so vivid in his mind that it had troubled him the next morning. I mean, he's really troubled over this. So he's remembered it. And he's remembered every line of it. So he was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. So here's what I want you to, I do want to stop here, and I didn't really mean to commentate this as we went this morning, but I don't want to miss some of this. I think this is one of the first times, maybe is the first time, I meant to look it up and forgot, but that you see these magicians of Egypt. And that's important because here later on in Genesis, when Israel is held captive there to that Pharaoh, and in stories to come, we're going to see that there rose up a Pharaoh that don't even know Joseph. But if you remember when Moses and Aaron go in there, these magicians now, that's the devil's crowd, but they could do magic. And I think it's always important to realize, and again, I'm not trying to boost the devil this morning or magic, but now these guys could perform. Remember when Moses and Aaron, they throwed the rod down and turned it into a stick snake? Well, the magicians, they did the same thing. I think sometimes we forget that. They did the same thing. Of course, Aaron's stick snake ate their stick snakes, so I mean, but they did the same thing, and many things they duplicated until we got to the blood. And the devil can duplicate a lot of things, and I think that's, that stood out to me because I think that's the first mention that we're introduced to these magicians that served Pharaoh. But just like many times, and just like when Moses went into camp that night with the lamb and said to put the blood on the doorpost and the lintel, the devil's crowd, the magicians of Pharaoh, couldn't repeat that. They couldn't do anything like that. And here again, they're unable to interpret these dreams. God stopped it or whatever he would have done there, and he's going to allow Joseph to do that. So I think that's so important. So these magicians of Egypt, verse 8, about middle ways down, and all the wise men thereof, and Pharaoh told them his dream. But there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. Then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, so I can kind of see the chief butler again just kind of waltzing in there, and he remembers something. He said, I do remember my faults this day. Pharaoh was wroth with his servants and put me in the ward in the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. And we dreamed a dream in one night, I and he, we dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was there with us a young man, a Hebrew servant to the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams. To each man, according to his dream, he did interpret. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was. Me he restored unto mine office, and him he hanged. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph. And they brought him hastily out of the dungeon, and he shaved himself and changed his raiment, and came in unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I've dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream and to interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. Now here's the difference between the crowds. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, in my dream, behold, I stood upon the river of the upon the bank of the river, and behold, there came up out of the river 7 kine, fat-fleshed and well-favored, and they fled in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kind came up after them, poor and very ill-favored, and lean flesh, such as I never saw it in all the land of Egypt, for badness. And the lean and the ill-favored kind did eat up the first 7 fat kind. And when they had eaten them up, it could not be known that they had eaten them, but they were still ill-favored. As at the beginning, so I awoke. So now he's told us the dream, but again, now Pharaoh's telling it, and he's added a little bit more. He's told us a little bit more than what we learned the first time, that when they ate it up, you couldn't even tell that anything had changed. Their demeanor didn't change. They didn't get a pot belly. They were still ill-favored. It says in verse 22, and I saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears came up, and one stalk full and good, and behold, 7 ears with thin and blasted with the east wind sprung up after them, and the thin ears devoured the 7 good ears. And I told this unto the magicians, but there was none that could declare it to me. And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one. God has showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. And 7 good kind are 7 years. So now Joseph's interpreting the dream, and then we're going to back up here in a minute. This is pretty lengthy this morning. It says in the 7 good kind, verse 26, are 7 years. And the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. So he said these 2 dreams are combined. And the 7 thin and ill-favored kind that came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty ears, blasted with the east wind, shall be 7 years of famine. So he said there's going to be 7 good years and 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh, what God is about to do, he showeth unto Pharaoh. Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. And there shall arise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of the famine following, for it shall be very grievous. And for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. So the reason why he had it twice was because it was going to be very grievous, and it is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. So because he dreamed the same dream twice, it meant that God was going to do it quickly and surely. So let's stop there for a second, because we've read quite a bit. We're going to finish this chapter today, but let's back up. I've already talked about some of this. So again, we pull the curtain back, and we're in Pharaoh's court, which is, the most mighty place, and decked out's a lot different than our views from the prison. And Pharaoh fell asleep here, and he's had a dream, and we see this dream, and of course we read the interpretation of it a minute ago. And so he's went to these magicians, and they couldn't interpret the dream. And I can see myself even in his court, and I really try to put you all there this morning as well as this chief butler. So this man that's been restored, he's had a dream interpreted, he's now back serving Pharaoh, and it's kind of like us being in the room, and maybe you overhear something, and he overhears, and his Pharaoh that he's a butler to is distressed, so no doubt that he's, wants to help him out, and he no doubt sees the magicians when he's coming in and out that they can't interpret the dream, and he goes ahead and swallows his pride, and he says, hey, he said, I forgot to tell you something. And he said, I remember my fault this day. He said, when I had made you mad, you remember that, Pharaoh, when I made you mad and you sent me down to the ward. He said, while I was down there and my time spent, if you'll remember, there was a man down there, and he said, me and the baker, we dreamed a dream. And Joseph, this man down there in prison, interpreted that dream, and you ain't going to believe this, but he not only interpreted, but 3 days later it come to pass. And if you remember, there was a baker and a butler, and he said that the baker was hanged, and I was restored. And I kind of seen him telling him that story. And Pharaoh's like, well, that's a pretty good story. And he said, yeah, it's about me. He said, I'm the one in that story. I was restored. Remember, you restored me 3 days later, and you hanged the baker out there on a tree. And so the chief butler remembers his faults that day, and he speaks on Joseph's behalf, which, remember, Joseph had asked him to do that. But just like us many times, we forget when we get back to the good side of things, we forget about the trouble. And it didn't take the butler long to realize when he was back serving Pharaoh, he forgot all about Joseph. He didn't remember him like Joseph had asked him to. And now he remembers his fault 2 years later. So then the Pharaoh here, so he's so excited about this down in verse 14. It says, then Pharaoh sinned and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. You know, I could kind of, again, see this and put yourself, it wasn't like Pharaoh had to think about it. And, you know, that's kind of interesting in itself. I mean, it'd be like, well, you know, there's a man down in the dungeon, in the prison, and the pit that can interpret this dream. But it's almost like the Bible's telling us the urgency and how much this bothered Pharaoh, because he didn't think about it. He didn't go and ask permission from anybody, or what do you think about this, or inquire of anybody. He said, listen, you go get this man and you bring him up here at once. You bring him hastily to me. So they brought him out of the dungeon, and he shaved himself. So Joseph cleaned up. He changed his raiment. So they didn't just bring him in shackles and chains. I mean, he's going before Pharaoh here. So they dressed him up a little bit, shaved him, and he came in unto Pharaoh. Now, verse 15, it says, and here's what's interesting. Of course, again, you've got the butler that serves Pharaoh, so obviously he's got mad at him before and put him down in a ward, but he trusts him enough, and this is, and again, I know sometimes I guess I'll blame it on me, I like to dramatize a little bit more, but it's kind of interesting that, you know, here Pharaoh, like, he didn't get to know him. He didn't just say, hey, I've heard about you. I mean, it's almost like he's trusted the people. I mean, those magicians must have failed him so bad that when the next verse turns and Joseph's standing there before him, he just dives right in. I mean, he don't get to know him. Say, man, how long you been down there? Where'd you come from? He says, listen, I dreamed a dream and I need some help. So he tells him in verse 15, he says, I've dreamed these dreams, and there's none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. So he says, listen, I heard you're the man. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. You know, that's a very important verse there in verse 16. And I'll be honest with you, I've probably failed to do that more than anybody in this room. But, you know, that so many times last week we saw that the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph no matter where he was, no matter if he was in prison, interpreting dreams, whatever he was doing, the Lord was with him. And, you know, unfortunately, I'm the chief of the lot this morning. But, you know, when we get a pat on the back, so many times our flesh and our pride wants to swell up a little bit. And, you know, this is not our answer. And again, I'm the chief of the lot. I mean, I guarantee you I don't answer people in this way. But I think that it is a good picture of how we should answer people when we do good at our jobs, or when we maybe pay our bills, or when we make good decisions, or if we succeed in life. Our answer shouldn't be, look what I've done, but our answer should be that God did it. He might have did it through us. He might have did it to help us or whatever, but it's God and not us. And I think Joseph truly understood that. And that's one of those things that's easier to preach and teach than it is to do, but it don't change the fact that Joseph lived that kind of life. He didn't say, yep, and I told that crazy butler 2 years ago that he should have told you that I knew how to interpret dreams and don't forget about me, and he forgot about me. And he said, he didn't say that at all. I mean, see, that's what I would have done, because I'm full of flesh. I just said, listen, let's take care of something before I do this for you. That crazy man right there forgot me for 2 years. But no, he said, listen, God is the one. God gets all the credit, and that's how we're supposed to live. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, so he answered him and told him that God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. So Pharaoh explains the dreams to him, and then the interpretation. So Joseph, down in verse number 29, has interpreted these dreams, and he's told Pharaoh, he said, listen, God showed Joseph how to answer him, and he said, behold, there come 7 years of great plenty. So they're going to have 7 great years in Egypt. I mean, man, the trees are going to be full. The fruit, there's going to be corn. I mean, it's going to be good times. Rain is going to be right on time every time. But then, after that, there's going to arise 7 years of famine. 7 years of nothing. And so bad that the 7 years of plenty shall be forgotten. It's going to wipe it out. It's not even going to be in somebody's memory. And all plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. I mean, this is terrible. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of the famine following, for it shall be very grievous. I mean, they're not going to remember nothing. And that's just the way it is even in life. Listen, you can do 100 things right and you do one thing wrong and it erases the 100 things right. So it's the same thing it's just the way the nature of the world is that, again, this is something bad coming and they're not even going to remember the 7 good years. So it says, and because it was doubled, the Lord's surely going to bring it to pass, and he's going to do it shortly, and it's established. It's going to happen. Now, Joseph tells him something wonderful here. So Joseph don't just stop. Look at verse 33. We'll pick up our reading. It says, now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. So here's where Joseph, the Lord's gave him some wisdom, and he's expounded upon. He didn't just interpret the dream, thank you for the time. He said, listen, here's your dream, and then here's what I do about the dream. I like people like that. He's proactive. I can't stand reactive people. I like proactive, and he's proactive. He's like, listen, we got some 14 years here to deal with. We got 7 good years, 7 bad. He said, now I'm not only going to tell you the problem, but I'm going to tell you the solution. I don't like people that just tells me the problem. I want to work the problem and come up with a solution. So he says, now here's the problem. So I'm going to also give you, because I'm a proactive, prudent in matters, and I'm going to give you the solution. Let Pharaoh do this, verse 34, and let him appoint officers over the land and take up a 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. So take a 5th of it. And let them gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And that food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, and the land perish not through the famine. And the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. So here's what he's told him. And I love this, and this is why it is good to be proactive and not reactive, and it's good to be prudent, and it's good to go ahead and solve a problem with a solution. Because he's now told him, said, here's what we're going to do. So this is bad, but if you take the 5th part and you store it all up for those 7 good years, that's going to be just enough to get us through the 7 bad years. And man, Pharaoh liked that. He said, that's a good idea. It's not like they had any ideas. And he's like, that makes sense. That will get us through. And notice that his plan took them all the way through the end of the 7 years. And this thing was good to Pharaoh. Verse 38, and Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? So again, Pharaoh is acknowledging that this is a special kind of individual Joseph is. He can't only interpret dreams, but man, he's proactive, he's smart, he's wise, he's using discretion here, and he's give Pharaoh this wonderful answer and solution, and Pharaoh's even now on his side saying, listen, man, the Spirit of God. Now that's a big S spirit in your Bible this morning. So, I mean, this is somebody that thinks he's a little g God, and he's now acknowledging that God exists and saying, man, the Spirit of God is in you, Joseph. Now, we know what Pharaoh believes. He believes in magic and all that stuff and little g gods. But, man, he acknowledges that, hey, this is bigger than me. And man, whatever's in you is bigger than what I got. Your God's bigger than my little g God. Verse 39, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph, forasmuch as God has showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. So again, this is another good reason why you should speak up if you've got a solution to a problem. Because, get ready, hold on to your seats. Thou shalt be over my house. So it's kind of like, he's looking all around and the answer's standing right in front of him. I like that. He's like, well, guys, is there anybody around that can do that? And they're like, no, we didn't. Like, we wouldn't even have gave you that solution. So, I don't know who would be in charge of that. And Joseph's standing right there in front of him. Verse 40, thou shalt be over my house, and according unto the word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, see, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. I tell you, I absolutely just chills run over me when I read that. That's how important the task that Joseph just done and given an answer and being proactive and giving a solution to a problem and just standing his ground, telling them that it's not me, I'm just being a Christian, it's God working through me. And now all of a sudden, this man that was just in prison a few minutes before is now number 2 to Pharaoh. Nobody in all the land of Egypt is greater than him but Pharaoh. And wouldn't it be a bad day to be a butler to Pharaoh? Because now, that's why again, so lessons from the butler is, if you tell somebody you're going to do something, you probably ought to follow through, because there might be a day that they might be your boss. And today's that day. So, nobody in Egypt's greater than Joseph but Pharaoh himself. Verse 42, and Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it upon Joseph's hand and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him to ride in the second chariot. Man, if I didn't have chills, I got them now. I'm talking like, this is great. And made him ride second chariot, which he had. And they cried before him, bow the knee. And he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Man, ain't that, now listen, Joseph went from being in a prison to now, if he walks down the street and wants to walk on that side of the street, then everybody on that side of the street better move to the other side of the street. If he says it, they better do it. If not, knowing this Pharaoh, he's going to have them killed. I'm talking at his command, everybody bows, changes direction, does what he says, and the only one greater is Pharaoh in all the land. This is power that we've never, it's unbelievable. Verse 46, and Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt And in the 7 plenteous years the earth brought forth by handfuls. And he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities, and the food of the field, which was round about every city, laid he up in the same. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea. That's how it's measured. Very much, until he left numbering. So he was keeping good records of it, and then finally one day it was like, man, we got so much. I mean, like, we can't even shut the doors on the storehouses. Like, I mean, there's not even no sense to count anymore. I mean, he was keeping pretty good records for a while, and then it just, I mean, they got so much that he just quit. It's like he just quit counting. For it was without number. They couldn't even keep track. And unto Joseph were born 2 sons. So let's go down to verse 51. And Joseph called, let's go down to verse 53 so I don't butcher a bunch of names this morning. And 7 years of plenteous that was in the land of Egypt were ended. Verse 54. And the 7 years of dearth began to come, according as Joseph had said, and the dearth was in all lands. But in all the land of Egypt there was bread. And when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said unto the Egyptians, Go unto Joseph, what he saith to you, do. And the famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold unto the Egyptians, and the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. Now that's something that this verse has always captivated me right there in verse 56. So there's this great famine is happening, and just like the dream, if you caught that this morning, just like the dream, people's already forgot about the good years. Did you catch that? They cried to Pharaoh, said, give us bread. I mean, they're crying to Pharaoh. And what did Pharaoh say? Go see Joseph. So after 7 years, Joseph's still the same stature he was. Go see Joseph. He had a plan. He'll give you the answer. Go see him. He's taking care of it. Man, Joseph's like the best chief of staff you've ever had in your life. Like, I mean, he is the greatest. You know, and I love, I'll be honest, like I said, I always study this stuff, but there's men through history, I miss when we have good political leaders that put political difference aside and they get good staffs. And you've seen that in the past and in the history. You know, Ronald Reagan did that. The very man that had run against him and led the campaign against him during the election, James Baker III, he made his chief of staff. He didn't listen to anybody. He didn't listen to what was the politically correct thing to do. He wanted the man that would be the job. It didn't matter. And he knew he was the type man that the day he walked in there to serve him, that he would put the political differences aside too, and that he would serve Ronald Reagan. And he made him a chief of staff. And man, this is the guy that's just like that. I mean, this is Joseph. He says, listen, go see Joseph. Now, here's what teaches you something else about Joseph. This is what I love in this verse. Now, it's one thing that Joseph can interpret dreams. Man, that's great. I can't do that, so I'm out there. I like to try to be proactive and have solutions to problems, so I can relate a little bit there. But man, we saw that. Joseph not only told him the dream, but now he said, here's the solution. Here's what I'd do right here. This is the plan. You better find you somebody that can execute this plan because this is serious. Pharaoh looked, and man, he was right there. He said, you're the man, Joseph. You're going to execute this plan, and you're going to see it through. Now, Joseph's not done yet. He's so wise that, watch this, I don't know if you caught it, but I love this in verse 56. And Joseph opened up the storehouses. So we were told that story. Man, it got to be so much they didn't even number it. They didn't even know what they had. I mean, they had so much they didn't even know how much they had. And sold unto the Egyptians. Right there tells you what kind of man Joseph is. He didn't only interpret dreams. He wasn't only proactive and had solutions to problems and was wise and prudent in matters. But listen, he didn't open up them storehouses and said, listen, y'all just come get what you want. Man, I've been smart for 7 years. done this thing. We've put it up, and look, now you should have canned some stuff along the way or whatever. He said, listen, I got corn for you, but you're going to buy it from me. He sold it to him. I've always, man, that word has just stuck out to me. He didn't give it to him. I mean, he sold it. That's the kind of, and so many times, and I think that's so important this morning. He didn't just say, well, come get what you want, and if you're here today and then you come tomorrow, I'm not going to call you out for it. He said, no, if you want this, you're going to come buy it from me. You're going to buy it. So he began to gather in this money and sold unto the Egyptians, and the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. And all countries, now watch this. See, this is another reason why Joseph is smart and proactive. All the countries came into Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn. I mean, this ain't free stuff we're giving away here. I mean, he's selling it. And at the same time, what's he doing? He's creating a revenue in a country, like or a place like Egypt, making, I mean, again, they're not just handing out free favors to everybody. He's saying, listen, we were proactive. We kept the storehouses. Somebody should have paid attention to what we was doing and done it too. Now, guess what? I'm not going to give it to you. I'm going to sell it to you. And they're gathering in revenue off of this corn. So all the countries came into Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn, because that the famine was so sore in all the lands. You know, I think that's, I've went over, but I think that's probably one of the greatest, like, business, that's a good business story right there. You know, I think man could study that and see about business and about proactiveness and just kind of the way we ought to handle ourselves. But I think the main thing we don't need to forget out of all that is that in all that, Joseph kept a very low estate. His pride stayed down. It wasn't him, but it was God. And God gave him wisdom to accomplish all that. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, your many blessings. Thank you for our class. Pray that you'll bless now during our time of prayer, Lord. And I just pray that you'll just bless us. Bless Pastor Cody as he brings the message. We'll thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen.